Matt, it's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much for joining us from Q4 Solutions.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so sure. So Matthew Smith, I'm an organizational psychologist by training, or an IO psychologist by training. I got my PhD out of Michigan State, many years ago. But spent most of my career in the talent management, human capital space, both as an external consultant with organizations, and then internally with organizations like a General Electric, Bank of America, doing various leadership development, staffing, talent acquisition, leadership roles. My role at Q4 Solutions is, I'm the executive vice president of consulting services. So I really have overall responsibility for not only the solutions that we provide to our clients, but for the team that helps deliver those solutions. So it's a pleasure to spend some time with you today.
Fantastic. Happy to have you, Matt. And can you tell us a little bit about an IO psychologist or
Sure.
industrial organization? So a lot of people know psychologists from a context of maybe mental health therapy and things like that, but what is an IO psychologist?
Yeah, so this is a great question that I have to explain to my grandparents for years and years exactly what I do. But industrial organizational psychology, or IO psychology, is a branch of psychology that's, just like you have clinical psychologists, child psychologists. IO psychology is a branch of psychology that applies the principles of psychological theory and the science of human behavior to people at work. So oftentimes it's understanding what are the problems organizations are having, or the individuals and teams within those organizations, and using that knowledge and that methodology to help solve those problems, both in a way that brings well-being, psychological well-being to the organization and people, but to provide economic benefits as well. So it's really a branch of psychology that's mainly focused on people at work and behavior at work. And so it could take a lot of different forms. So you see a lot of IO psychologists in talent acquisition, because assessments are a big part of what we do in terms of understanding what are the characteristics that predict positive outcomes for the organization and for people. It can be in training and development. How do people learn over time? How to shift behavior? It could be in talent management, so succession planning, understanding gaps within the workforce. A lot of what IO psychologists do are work on those problems for organizations.
I like where you left off with that because I wanted to ask you, so what does an IO psychologist do? And before you jump into that, is it, a lot of people may be familiar with the TV show Billions, and there was a psychologist on that. Is that an idea of what an IO psychologist does? Is that anywhere near the ballpark? Or what is
Boy,
it that
I
IO
wish
psychologists
I'd seen
actually
the
do?
show Billions. I don't have that reference. I'm trying to think, is there any IO psychologists in Hollywood? I'm not sure there are. I think what a typical IO psychologist does, it varies. So, I know, have very colleagues over the year, some who just do research, or they sit in academia and they teach undergrads and graduate students, publish research on, whatever the topic is that's related to people at work. So, you have a research component. You have people more like myself who are what we call applied. So we're working in organizations, either internal organizations or external organizations, helping them solve their problems, and typically related to work behavior and people issues. So, you can see IO psychologists take a variety of forms. I think the commonality is they're trying to understand the problems organizations and individuals and teams within organizations are experiencing. And, what's their niche, can come out. Some do all coaching, and that's all they do. Some just build assessments and validate those assessments, and that's what they do. So it can vary. It can really vary.
You mentioned a bit about assessments, and that's a core competency of Q4 Solutions. Can you tell me a little bit about that in terms of how assessments used and how important they are in choosing talent, and what kind of risk do they actually mitigate?
Yeah. So, assessments, at the core of it, you're collecting information to make decisions. So an assessment is providing that data, whether it's, hey, I have 3 candidates for this vice president of sales job. An assessment can be a tool to assess, okay, what do we know about what's required for that job? What are the characteristics that can predict success? And then as an IO psychologist, assessing people on those characteristics to be able to come back and say, this person will lead to the most success. So at the core of it, assessments, particularly in selection and hiring, are to give decision makers good information. So, just kind of thinking of a time, and I think from an assessment perspective where we can show that there's an economic benefit as well, that's pretty powerful. So, I'm thinking of a project worked on where, it was a computer software company moving into servers and consulting, and they really wanted to reassess their sales force. They had a lot of good salespeople who could pick up the phone and say, hey, I'd like to order 100 computers. Yeah, I'll get you that. But, the salespeople who could really create custom solutions, were struggling. And, we built an assessment where we could look at and then validate within existing salespeople to say people who score in the top 30% of this assessment sell, $1 million more a year than people at the mid-range. And so it's those kind of economic decisions that, if the IO psychologist has done the work, analyzed the jobs, understood what's required, assess people against those characteristics, you can hire people that are going to be more successful in the organization, and it pays for itself. The assessment costs get paid for by the productivity increases from that person. Assessments can also be used, from a development standpoint. Oftentimes we use assessments to get a sense on what are people's strengths and development opportunities. So I could be working with you and say, hey, I've noticed you've never really worked on a strategic plan before. That's a development opportunity that came out of an assessment. Now let's engage in learning to get you better at that. And so assessment can provide the insights to be able to say, yeah, this person, needs help, or maybe here's some strengths we got to leverage more in that person's job. Systematically, assessments are often used to understand talent gaps. So looking at a whole sales force or a whole R&D group to understand where there are gaps, and then succession planning assessments are used as well, trying to pick who are going to be the future leaders of the company. Sometimes those leaders haven't engaged in activities that a CEO will have engaged in, but you use assessments to see how they would fare. So at the core of it, assessments are decision-making tools. We're giving information to our clients on who's the right person to hire, what to engage in terms of investment and training, et cetera.
One of the areas that I'm really excited to collaborate with Q4 Solutions on together with BetterGo is this assessment in this category of identifying talent, finding the right fit, especially in terms of mobility. When it comes to relocating, there's a lot of different reasons why companies would need talent around the world, sourcing talent around the world as well. The actual assessments, from a global mobility perspective, we're looking at things about talent retention. We're looking at choosing the right individuals to go into locations that are kind of the key head figures in running this business investment. And sometimes these investments can be in the billions of dollars.
Right.
It's that are very difficult to manage and to work in. So I know that Q4 pulls from a lot of resources and tried and true assessments, some of them being the cross-cultural adaptability inventory, the dimensional management matrix, et cetera. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the tools that you utilize in this process through assessments, looking at candidates, and help us to see how does this fit in the lens, particularly for global mobility?
Sure. So, kind of part of the technical training of somebody, IO psychologist is getting to what is required for the job. What are the competencies that are going to be required? So in a relocation situation, where the person's already a high performer, it's a little different. It's understanding, okay, what are the competencies that are going to let that person adapt to that culture and be more successful in that culture versus necessarily the job components. And so part of kind of a strategy of an IO psychologist and what we do at Q4 Solutions is first, what are those competencies that if somebody is either high or low on will better predict their success in staying in the assignment and their adaptability to that culture, country, et cetera. And so it's a little bit different. Part of our approach in any assessment we use is we make sure that the assessment is reliable, that it's consistent. We tend to use tried and true measures that have been, scientifically researched over decades that can show that you get a consistent score each time. We also, look for assessments that are valid, that actually predict outcomes. It's interesting. Just had a call with somebody today who is using a BuzzFeed assessment called, and I won't mention the name, but we had a conversation around, okay, what is the reliability and validity of that assessment to make hiring decisions? And of course, there are none. So you're just kind of using pop science to be able to say, hey, this sounds cool. I took this 5-minute BuzzFeed thing, and it says I can adapt to any culture in the world. Well, part of our approach and part of our training is we tend to use tools that are just, have the reliability and validity there. And so in kind of a relocation situation, we really looked at, from a couple areas. One, a leadership dimension. This person's going to have a very senior role in the country, so we want to make sure they have those leadership elements. And some leadership elements, while they may be expressed differently in different cultures, the core of it is consistent across cultures. So, how you're being considerate in an Asian culture can be very different than how you can be considerate in an American culture. So, but the fact of being considerate to people can be consistent. We also look at assessments that tend to be global. So some of the personality assessments we use are in multiple languages. They have global norms, so we can see that the structure holds up across different countries and cultures. I think some of the things we're talking about are typically more Americans, but the country they're going into, can have that piece. And then cross-cultural, the adaptability really looks at 4 dimensions that really get at a general disposition on how well, if you put this person in any culture, how well will they adapt? Are they emotionally resilient? Can they handle stress pretty well? Because being in a different culture definitely provides stress, positive and negative. There's change required. Are they pretty flexible? The second dimension is around flexibility and openness. Are they open to new perspectives, new information, new ways of doing things? The third dimension is what we call perceptual acuity. So when you don't know the language, can you pick up those cues that maybe the person I'm talking to isn't following what I'm saying, or that they're having a reaction to what I'm proposing? So perpetual acuity is pretty high. And then the last dimension is really personal autonomy. Do they have the strong sense of self that they can use when they're going into these different situations of different behavior, so they can clearly differentiate between what's them and different people versus somebody who's maybe overly adaptive and loses sense of who they are. So the cross-cultural assessment provides good insights on those 4 dimensions. And we have other research tools that just give us a sense on, based on the culture, what are the dominant characteristics around power distance, consensus consideration, individualism. Different cultures are high or low on that, and having some sense based on what country that person is going to can give us some insight as well.
For us, that's a key component in the basically leverage and working with the assessments that Q4 Solutions has, because a lot of times you mentioned pop science and things like that. There's a lot of assessments that can be developed that talk about personality, etc. But you're looking for things that are developed first and foremost from a psychological perspective. They're science-backed or science-based, and then tried and true over time. So when you talk about consistency and results, because when you're making these investments, you can't be making them on the whim, but also at the same time, you want to have tools that are reliable, that you can rely on. But
Absolutely.
further still, what I love about the function that Q4 Solution provides to the mobility space is that ability to be agile, where you have a repertoire of many assessments that you look at and competencies that you're saying, these are tools that we can use to identify specific areas, whether it's skill-based, whether it's cultural-based, leadership-based, etc. But you're able to pull the best ones together and tailor them to match a situation that an employee or a company is actually looking for. So it helps to protect investments, but it's also a really strategic way of planning for your population. Oftentimes, mobility gets put in a position where it's more of a transactional, a functional approach, where the business unit has made the decision, they're ready to go. They'll go to mobility and say, give us the cost. What's the tax here? What's this going to cost us? And it's more of a function of the decision that's been made. However, pulling these assessments and pulling this kind of partnership together with BetterGo is that we're now able to position this in front of those decision makers to say to them, no, before you're putting talent out there, let's see where your strengths are. Let's see where your weaknesses are, because you want to protect your investment. And that's one a lot of industry colleagues talk about, particularly in the mobility world, is becoming more strategic and having conversations at the table where businesses are making decisions from investment, from talent, etc. This helps to put them at the forefront of that. We talked a little bit about assessments. We talked about the role of an IO psychologist in terms of a general perspective in corporations. How does the role of the IO psychologist fit into the assessment process when we are working with clients?
Yeah, so I think in a couple ways. One is the upfront work to make sure, what the assessment approach matches the need. So, in some cases we go in, we're pretty assessment agnostic because until we understand the job, what's required, if we just throw the same assessment at everybody, you're not necessarily getting the best results. So that local piece of really understanding, what are the characteristics that lead to success, we're going to try to map that assessment piece. I think from there, part of it is putting the system together to say, okay, if you're looking at 200 people for a mobility assignment, what's the process of how they go through the assessment, who gets the feedback, what is steps taken if somebody doesn't have a good assessment. So somebody is a high performer, comes back and it says, based on assessment, this person is going to struggle in this country. Are there then kind of learning interventions or some coaching that could go on? Maybe that person needs a little bit more support when they're in country because they want this role. It's highly important, but if you don't do something, this person's going to be home in 6 months. So part of it that person is also thinking, okay, what are some learning and some support that person needs? The other piece from the assessment perspective, IO psychologists, we run the assessment. Some of these assessments are only interpreted by licensed psychologists or people with a PhD. And so part of that IO psychologist role is to look at the data, come up with a report, and then feed it back to the stakeholders in the organization. Part of our process too is understanding who else is involved in this decision. So, oftentimes in these sort of situations, we'll have the partner or spouse or who, if there's a significant other, go through the assessment as well, because that person, it perhaps is going to be more exposed to the culture than the person who's at work the whole time. And we got to make sure that there's no red flags there, that person's going to be unhappy, dissatisfied, that could end the assignment early. So, I mean, the IO psychologist, it's designing it, it's setting up the system that it runs, it's conducting the assessments, it's debriefing the assessments, and then post-assessment, if there's additional suggestions or opportunities, giving that feedback or, being a coach afterwards, depending on the need.
I love that you mentioned the holistic view as well, that you're including the whole family, because especially when it comes to a mobility decision, you're affecting not just one person or whoever's in the career space, but you're affecting the entire family unit. And nowadays that decision can be even more intense because most families are dual income families. So there's going to be a sacrifice in any situation of one family member having to give something up and they have to transfer to a new location. And that process is quite difficult, especially for individuals who have their own careers, who have made a success of themselves, and now their spouse or their partner is going on assignment, and they may not be able to keep their current job. So pulling in that holistic view of the family, I think is a wonderful thing. I love that you mentioned that. The other thing is too, is that it sounds very complicated, but for our viewers is that this is a process that can be done in a matter of a week. So putting together tailored assessments, doing the debrief and recap with an IO psychologist together with the employee as well as with the management to either separate calls or together. The idea is that this package can be put together and provided tailored specifically on a short basis. And we're not talking about a long time, we're talking about a week. So the employee gets not only a tailored assessment process for themselves, but a holistic perspective for their family as well. Also accompanied with the debrief and basically the transliteration or the translation of that data through someone who understands psychology like yourself, Matt, or someone from your team that's able to translate these terms and say, okay, well, this is what it means in this situation. And the final comment that I'll just say that I think is really wonderful is the longevity of these assessments, because I know I had a few conversations the employee that would be going on assignment, and they showed a bit of a hesitation to say, well, what if this affects my employer for making a decision in terms of whether or not I'm selected for the assignment? I think from the perspective of doing the assessments, it's not a yes or no. It's really identifying strengths and weaknesses. And the benefit or the beauty of that is being able to match beforehand support mechanisms that can help them wherever the weaknesses are. So it's not a kind of blanket black and white. If you don't pass, you don't go, but it's more of, hey, let's see where you are based on the situation that the company needs you on. And more so, now we have factual data that can legitimize the company providing you support, like executive coaching or additional resources to get you into the position, because nobody is going to be perfect on all levels, and that can be expected. But it's more important to understand where you may need that support and anticipate that before you're in a situation where, one, you're trying to figure out what the heck's going on in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And then two, and this happens mostly after the fact, you realize what support you actually could have had that made them successful. But by that time, you've already passed a resignation point, or you're kind of back home in country, or these kind of things. And from a company's perspective, often they'll say, well, if we have issues, our employees will raise those up. But often those issues are being raised up at the point of, I've had it, I'm done, here's my resignation. And that's way too late to make a decision. So I love those aspects of, one, it's agile, it's quick and easy, so that you can put together something that's specifically tailored for a corporation and their employee basis based on their project. Two, that it helps them protect an investment. And third, as well, is that it helps the employees to get support in areas that they may need to make a success of that assignment. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity for companies to get involved and start looking at mobility from a more strategic level. And that's why I'm so excited to work and partner with Q4 Solutions, because you guys are the experts here. You've honed over the last century, honed these skills. You have perfected the assessments. They're tried and true, and you yourselves are coming from that psychological perspective that you are certified, that you have the PhDs, that you have the degrees to really interpret the data, but also help to companies to make decisions that are wise and protect their investments. So Matt, thank you so much. I'm thrilled that we had you to come on and explain and talk a little bit about what IO psychology is as we launch our partnership together going forward. I think this is a great opportunity for our customers and our clients to understand. So what is this? How does this apply to me? Why is this important? And hopefully for them to also through this presentation to feel the excitement that I have as well, and how this can really revolutionize and help to substantiate the mobility world and provide a strategic position for global mobility individuals.
No, I appreciate that. Same here. We're very excited as well. I think there's a great application for this process, and again, kind of to the point of IO psychology, it's about economics, well-being for companies in their investment decisions, but it's also about psychological well-being. You want people who are taking these assignments to have all the support they have, and including their spouse, the trailing spouse or partner or significant other. I think that's critical to success. I've been in organizations where we've had international assignments fall through, and you have to send the person back home and have to explain to the CEO why this person was here for 3 months, and we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now it's gone. So just having the right support, right information ahead of time could solve a lot of those problems.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt.
All right. Good to see you again, Michael. Good luck. Keep dry.